Hi everyone. This video is an introduction to the philosophy of Taoism via a close reading of chapters 1 through 3 in the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching is defined or translated as the way and its power, or the way of virtue. It was written by Lao Tzu in the 6th century BCE and is foundational for understanding the philosophy or religion of Taoism. It includes 81 poetic chapters, which include topics ranging from metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and political philosophy. This version of the Tao Te Ching that I'm looking at on the screen here is called a translation of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching and Wang Pi's commentary, or Wang Bi's commentary. I'll include a link to it in the description down below. Wang Bi was a 3rd century Confucian scholar, 3rd century of the Common Era. He emphasized metaphysics and he wrote a commentary on the I Ching. He's also interested to show that Confucius's philosophy is compatible with Lao Tzu's philosophy. So let's go ahead and start with chapter 1 here in the Tao Te Ching, which is about the Tao. Now, the Tao has different senses to it. And I like this book here by Huston Smith, The World's Religions. In his chapter on Taoism, he describes 3 different senses in which we can understand the Tao. The first is the way of ultimate reality. The second is the way of the universe, or the way of nature. And the third is the way of human nature. We get the first sense here in chapter 1 pretty clearly. So let's go ahead and look at this chapter line by line. Each one of these chapters is very short, and in this version it's followed by these footnotes, which is actually Wang Bi's commentary. So let's start. It says, "The Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name." So as Lao Tzu starts to talk about the Tao, he says that you can't talk about the Tao. To use words to describe this phenomenon or this reality is to denote something, as he says in the first note down below. When you denote something, you refer to it with these words. In the case of the Tao, actually, it's a failed attempt. When you try to say the Tao is such and such, your words fail to refer to the actual reality. So he says in note number 1, "Therefore, the eternal cannot be spoken of and named." Moving on, he says, "The nameless, it or non-being, is the origin of heaven and earth. The nameable being is the mother of all things." So you have this distinction between non-being and being, or we sometimes say non-existence and existence. Here, I think, in the context of Taoism, non-being would be understood as emptiness, and being as existing stuff. So moving on, he says, "Therefore, constantly without desire, there is the recognition of subtlety, but constantly with desire, only the realization of potentiality." Now, the meaning of this stanza here is not so clear. One of my strategies in trying to understand the Tao Te Ching is to compare different translations with one another. And in this case, I found that this translation, called a philosophical translation of the Tao Te Ching by Ames and Hall, this one here is helpful with this particular stanza. So I'm going to go ahead and read the translation of this stanza from this book. He says, or they say, "Thus, to be really objectless in one's desires," and the word here is wu yu, "is how one observes the mystery of all things, while really having desires is how one observes their boundaries." So this word here of desiring, it's called in Chinese wu yu. They also comment on it in this book. They say, "Thus wu yu, rather than involving the cessation and absence of desire, represents the achievement of deferential desire. Desire based upon a non-coercive relationship with the world and a mirroring understanding of it is shaped not by the desire to own, to control, or to consume, but by the desire simply to celebrate and to enjoy. It is deference." So this is the difference, I think, between appreciating something and wanting to control it. So Lao Tzu here is describing not desirelessness, not having no desire at all, but appreciating something for what it is instead of trying to control it. So that's a big difference in the understanding if we interpret it that way. He continues, the two come from the same source. The two here being above the nameless and the nameable, or non-being and being. Having different names, both are called mysteries, more mystical than the most mystical, the gate of all subtleties. All right, he's got some comments here that from this mystery, from this non-existence, all these things come, and this mystery would be known as the Tao. Okay, this brings us to chapter 2, and Lao Tzu says, when all in the world recognize beauty as beauty, it is ugliness. When they recognize good as good, it is not good. This is a difficult passage to understand, and to help us better understand it, I want to read from this translation, which is from Brian Brown Walker. He said, here it is, he says that when people find one thing beautiful, another consequently becomes ugly. When one man is held up as good, another is judged deficient. So this seems to be a very different understanding from the translation that we have on the screen here. So the question is, on the screen it sounds like Lao Tzu is talking about metaphysics. It sounds like he's just saying that the beautiful is the ugly and the good is the evil. Well, that's different from saying in order to recognize something beautiful, we have to recognize something else as ugly. And in order to recognize something as good, we must recognize something else as evil. So that's a question of epistemology. But perhaps he's doing something entirely different. So perhaps if we understand him to be responding to Confucius, all he's trying to say is he's asking us to avoid strict labels and to avoid thinking too much and not to get too attached to one side or the other. This seems to make better sense of the book as a whole, because in the book, the purpose of the book seems to be to encourage us to live a good life and not an evil one. And if good and evil are just the same thing, then it seems to make his whole purpose futile. So he goes on here in chapter 2 saying, therefore being and non-being beget each other, hard and easy complement each other, long and short shape each other, high and low rely on each other, sound and voice harmonize with each other, front and back follow each other. So we see here that there is a clear relationship between these two things. You might recall the symbol that comes from Taoism. This is the yin and the yang. This is represented here best in this chapter. So you've got two sides to all things, and they're complementary sides. That's not to say that they're normatively equal and that we should prefer the evil just as much as we prefer the good, but descriptively, life concludes these two things, good and evil. It's a type of dualism, and so we would be well advised to take them both into consideration. He continues, therefore the sage administers without action and instructs without words. He lets all things rise without dominating them, produces without attempting to possess, acts without asserting, achieves without taking credit. And because he does not take credit, it will never leave him. So if you look at footnote number 2 there, right after that word action. So administering without action. In the Chinese, the word is wu wei, which is sometimes translated non-action or no action. But it's probably better translated as perfect action or acting in accord with nature. And so this is the idea that we're not to strive and work super hard in order to accomplish something. We're supposed to recognize how things move. And I want to bring up now at this point this book, Trying Not to Try, which is based on this notion of Wu Wei. It's a great book if you want to try to understand Chinese philosophy. It's written very down to earth. The author's name is Edward Slingerland. But this idea of perfect action or acting in accord with nature means going with the flow. And so a sage here administers by going with the flow, instructing without words, not trying to control things, but just going with the flow of nature. And this brings us to chapter 3, where Lao Tzu says, "Exalt not the worthy, so that the people will not fight. Prize not the rare treasure, so that they will not steal. Exhibit not the desirable, so that their hearts will not be distracted." I take him to mean here that we shouldn't overemphasize famous and successful people, that we shouldn't overvalue material things, and that we shouldn't over-cultivate our desires and our passions. If we do, then society will be filled with crime. He continues, "Therefore in governing, the sage empties the people's hearts and fills their stomachs, weakens their will and strengthens their bones. He always keeps them void of knowledge and desire, so that those who know will not dare to act." Now, this is a difficult passage to understand. Again, I turn to a different version. This is Brian Brown Walker's translation again, to help us better understand this section. And he says here, "Therefore the wise person sets an example by emptying her mind, opening her heart, relaxing her ambitions, relinquishing her desires, and cultivating her character." So the form of leadership that Lao Tzu has in mind here, if this translation is correct, is one where you're setting an example. You're not being the assertive leader who's trying to control everything. You're trying to set an example, and this type of example is one that follows the way of nature or going with the flow, not trying to control everybody. This last line in chapter 3 says, "Acting through inaction, he leaves nothing ungoverned." Again, here the word is wu wei, and this translation says, "Do by not doing, and act with non-action. Allow order to arise of itself." So as a leader, the proper way to lead is to go with the flow, follow the way of nature, and people will follow you, and you won't have as much crime. You'll have a successful society. Okay, I hope you found that helpful.